Okay, I'm going to talk about creativity, but before I do that, there are some things which went on earlier today which I'd like to link back to. So the Twitter session that I know a lot of you went to, I thought was tremendous for a number of reasons. One of the ones that I really liked was it was hugely practical, as I saw, because I joined up to the 2020 stream and I suddenly saw a whole bunch of people tweeting, and clearly for some of them it was their first time in doing that. I would like, yeah, I didn't actually see anyone saying, "Can anyone hear me?" which would be sort of the, if it takes you back to the old days of when you first tried email, you'd email one of your colleagues and then you'd trot round to their office and go, "Did you get that?" I go, "Yes, I got it." That's not really the idea. But anyway, the point about it was it's hugely practical, and I would like to try and emulate that. Creativity, perhaps not without good reason, has in some ways a reputation for being rather mysterious and complex and murky. And I am going to do the very best I can to identify some very clear things that I would hope that you could apply immediately. I'm going to make suggestions about it, and if it seems as though what I'm saying is not clear, please stop me as I'm going along. You'll also notice that on the screen is my email address. My colleagues and I are very excited about being involved with you. If at any point you have questions or you would like to bounce ideas or just say, is this possible, please get in touch. We love talking about this, and it would be fantastic if we can support your efforts in any way. So there's the practical aspect. I also just wanted to mention that if you are not using Twitter much or at all, I strongly recommend it. I hadn't used it until about perhaps a year ago. Now, my wife, who's a professor of creativity, has always been very quick to adopt new technologies, and I'd sort of watch over her shoulder as she'd be doing things on this. My view at the time was that Twitter was basically a system for people to send photographs of sandwiches that they were eating and saying, I'm at Starbucks, and go, wonderful, that's what we invented the internet for. But having watched my wife, I have learned a lot about it. I mean, she now has something like 90,000 followers, and she's finding it hugely useful. I have about 4 followers, but I also find it incredibly valuable. I learn so much from Twitter every day, and the wonderful thing is people can't say much to you, so you sort of skim through it and you go, oh, that was really useful. As Alan was saying, in the form of a haiku, I learned something useful. So I just wanted to say, if you're not using it, as somebody who is relatively new to it, I strongly encourage you to do it. And certainly, from watching my wife, the power of the influence on it can be superb. I have small children. My son wanted to be a satellite for Halloween, so we work with NASA, and there's certain standards that one has to adopt, and so we made him a satellite, and my wife just happened to tweet a picture of it. Well, I think it was someone from SpaceX or one of the other organizations immediately tweeted back and said, next time you're in California, we will give your son a tour. Now, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So I strongly encourage you to do that. I also wanted to link with Alicia's presentation about DARPA. Basically, the work that we do is sort of very similar to what DARPA is doing. We do it across maybe a broader range of sciences in that we work across a huge range of agencies and not with quite the same restrictions that DARPA necessarily has. But the thing that I really wanted to pick up on this was the idea of going beyond the usual suspects. Now, clearly that makes sense when you're doing big science and exciting science, but I also wanted to very much echo that for your personal lives, and this links as well to Twitter. I would encourage you to be brave about people you follow. People who aren't necessarily interested in the things that you're interested in, or don't necessarily even share your views, because it is amazing what's sometimes referred to as creative friction can actually achieve. So just to sort of link those various thoughts, I had to get them out of my mind right now because otherwise I would have forgotten them, and then that would have been a shame. I'd be sort of flying home going, "Don't, that's what I should have said." So I'm going to talk about creativity, but what I'm going to do is sort of break this up into some little bits. I'm going to say a bit about it. I'm going to ask you to do some things. I promise you I will not ask you to do anything which is uncomfortable, embarrassing, or dangerous. And I say this in all seriousness because creativity in some ways has a little bit of a bad reputation. Sometimes people are saying, oh, we're going to have to do trust falls and we're going to be blindfolded. No, none of that, I promise. I just want to talk about thinking. How we get stuck, how we get unstuck, how we're all extremely good at thinking, and make some suggestions about ways you might choose to guide your thinking when you are stuck. But before I do that, I want to talk about not necessarily the dangers of creativity, but some issues around this, which I think we need to address. So have a look at that, and then compare it with that. Now, from a purely logical point of view, they are equivalent. Whoopee, we cured breast cancer. Fantastic. But there is now an increasing enthusiasm around this idea of innovation and creativity. And it's interesting to note that creativity is sort of the black sheep term that organizations don't necessarily like to use. They like the word innovation. Innovation sounds profit-oriented and bottom line and sensible. Creativity sounds a bit dangerous. We can unpack that as we go along, but the point about it is people are increasingly thinking that we've got to be innovative in everything that we do. Sounds like a good approach, but there is a flip side to this, and it's an unfortunate one. And that is that a whole bunch of people are thinking, my ideas aren't really good enough anymore in that case, because we've got this sort of view that innovation is shiny and there'll be social networks and satellites and all sorts of things like that. The point about this is our objective is to eradicate breast cancer. How we achieve it is entirely secondary. So I wanted you to hold this in your mind, because this is something that we are seeing increasingly. We work with a number of NGOs in the area of poverty reduction, and there is a subtext within many of these organizations that projects that are successful but dull are not as worthy as projects that are successful and in some way shiny and exciting. Now, all I wanted to say was, let's focus on what it is we're trying to achieve. And there are techniques that we can adopt that might help us come up with ways to overcome difficulties, but please do not undervalue any ideas. I did a webinar for Annette 2-3 months ago about fundraising. Some of you may have heard this. And as part of that, I was looking for ideas of examples of fundraising, and I came across one little story which I thought was fantastic. There was someone, I believe it was actually in Australia, where they were talking about a fundraising activity they'd done where they bought Bic biros from a discount shop and they went around the streets selling them. Now, with the best will in the world, it would be hard to regard that as having a high level of novelty. You buy pens, you sell pens. Probably not going to get the Nobel Prize for that. It was their highest grossing fundraising activity ever. This is important to bear in mind. When we are trying to solve problems, we are looking for effective solutions. And every day we're looking for more effective solutions, and many people already have them, and you can adopt them and apply them. So that was the first thing that I wanted to say. The next thing I wanted to say about creativity is, for some people, the lady on my right, this will be an exciting thing. So let's be creative. And for a few people, they go, finally, my ship has come. This is what I've always wanted to do. And then for a proportion of people, you get the opposite reaction. And it's not unusual for people to say things like, I'm not creative, I don't feel creative, I can't paint. There's a whole collection of stories. In fact, unfortunately, and I'm sure unintentionally, our education system often encourages people to think that their creativity is either absent or inappropriate. So, it would not be surprising if a number of you here are thinking creativity, oh, do you know, I could skip that one actually because that's not for me. And what's interesting about that, I would say, is this. Gosh, you say, that is actually a very interesting picture. Now, the reason that this is so interesting is it wouldn't be surprising if several of you came here today and had to navigate through traffic a bit like that. You may have walked across it, you may have had to drive within it, but the point is, it's a hugely complex process to navigate a dynamic system like that. And yet, and the proof is here, you all did it successfully. Well done. You are facing complex challenges almost every minute of your life. And in fact, if you think about it from a genetic point of view, you are the result of organisms that were really good at dealing with adaptation and dealing with complex, ill-formed problems. Well done. You are highly creative people. The problem is that if you came in and said, do you know what? I actually managed to drive through traffic, you don't get a lot of plaudits for that, which is a shame, because what you're actually saying is, I'm really good at dealing with complex problems. Yes, you are. So, what I would like to encourage you to do is to recognize that you are actually extremely good at solving problems. There are people who solve problems in different ways. Each of us will have a preference towards different aspects of problem solving, and that's important, and we can talk a little bit about that. But the really important part is, like it or not, you are actually extremely creative people. Some of you may feel uncomfortable about that. But what I wanted to say about this is that given that we are highly creative people, the idea of talking about creativity in some ways should be less exciting. So what I want us to do is, when you go away from here, I would like you to have in your mind, I'm a creative person, I demonstrate it all the time. Sometimes when I'm solving problems, it's appropriate to seek high levels of novelty. Sometimes there may be existing solutions that I can reuse. This is all very good. And if somebody comes up and says, what did you think about creativity? The reaction that I'm after from you, try again, is that. Yeah, creativity, sure. Yeah, I do that all the time. Now let's talk about the problems we're going to work on. I would like, in some ways, to sort of deflate the balloon around this. Creativity, it's important, you're all doing it. There are some ways that we might be able to be more effective. Great, on we go. Now, in order to help that, one of the things I want to do is maybe stop talking about creativity as such and actually say, what are we trying to do here? We are trying to get better ideas. Initially, I'd written down, let's try and get great ideas, but in fact, for some people, this will be slightly stressful. They'll go, is my idea great? Oh, I don't know, what's the benchmark for great? So we won't worry about that, because stress is counterindicated when it comes to actually coming up with interesting ideas. I would like you to be relaxed and enjoy this. We are after better ideas, and every morning when you get up, you go, I wonder if I've got any even better ideas to work with. That's really what we're talking about. Now, in order to do this, there's been some very good work on looking at what are the factors which really enhance our creativity. And by vast majority, the factor which explains the majority of the difference between, say, in organizations where there is demonstrated a relatively low level of creativity versus the high level ones, it's about your environment. Could be about the physical environment, but predominantly it's about the psychological one. It's about how you feel in the place that you work or the places that you work, and what works best for you in terms of your creative processes. So here's what I would like to do. Oh, they say, wait a minute, this isn't the deal. He's meant to just talk to us. No, this is a two-way street. I am going to ask you to do stuff. I would like you So, I am sure there are many more conversations to have, and annoyingly I'm now going to interrupt, but what I would like to, actually saying I'm going to interrupt is completely redundant. I have interrupted, I just thought I'd point that out. What I'd like to do is just go around a few of the tables and get some thoughts on what you think helps you. And I'll scribble down some of these things in a completely illegible manner. And then we'll reflect upon it, because what's really important about this is the research is very clear. Building yourself an environment that works for you is hugely important in just amplifying your natural creativity, and your preferences do not have to match anyone else's. So for instance, it wouldn't be surprising to find that someone on your table needs complete silence and someone else really can't think unless there's loud music. That's fine. The important thing is to recognize that actually the halfway point is bad for everyone. So I'm going to encourage you to think about how we do that. Now, we've got a radio mic, which we will scoot around in a moment, but I would appreciate it if the table that knows in its heart of heart that it is table 1 would identify itself now. Thank you. Do you want to bring the mic up here to this table? There's a mic right there. Tell me some things that enhance your creativity.
All right, our table said that we need to be surrounded by people who are intelligent and challenging as a catalyst to our own creativity. And another person said he or she was the exact opposite of that. Surrounded by people so set in their ways, I want to think outside the box that I want to change them. Before I retire, I think was added later. By Judy. Oh, sorry. I know, but they didn't know that.
All right.
All right. Others said they need, or someone else said, needs a period of time to digest outside the context of the initial meeting. For example, in the shower, on a walk, allow it to churn around.
I'm sorry, going for a walk was a shower
digesting
or walk?
while in the shower or going for a walk.
Yep.
Allow it to churn around.
Yep. Thank you.
Another does a dream sweep.
Dream sweep. Tell me about a dream sweep.
That wasn't me.
Tell me about a dream sweep.
Oh my gosh, this is like confession. Well, I am in a clinical skincare company, and I oversee the R&D in our company and the team. Honestly, many of the formulas that I develop will happen subconsciously overnight. I will waken from a dream sleep and have to write them down. So I'll be aware of the issue or what I'm trying to come up with, for a period of time before I go to sleep, and there it comes.
Fantastic. So yeah, there's some really interesting research on that. Okay, the table that won't be a number. It's far too cool to... Over here. Okay, thank you.
Where?
Oh, right. We'll do it. Give the mic to her. Yeah.
You are bad. All right, so our table was really had lots of great ideas. The other one was, one of them is sleep. That sleep is we don't put enough emphasis on sleep in America to get quality sleep so that you can actually have a kind of a lucid subconscious dream in the morning when you're waking up, and that you are fully together and there and present when you're with all your great friends for these ideas. Another one was to holding the space. You know, when you have an idea, or you think you want to have an idea or a brainstorming session, and you want to bring people together, not jumping to conclusions and holding the space and being creative and listening, so that you can be, so those ideas can percolate and come to you. And then, was there another one, Amber?
Meditation. And prayer, I find that right before I go to sleep, and if I get into a place where there's absolutely nothing in my mind, that's when ideas come up.
Fantastic.
Well, I pray about having clarity and just emptying my mind of all the world's problems, and then there's an idea.
What a very spiritual group you all are. Fran, can I move the mic up so we can hear?
At this table, there was a lot of talk not about, there was someone who said when she can't go to sleep and there's a million things in her mind, and that's when she just tries to focus on some of them and comes up with her better ideas. But there was a lot of talk about getting input, and that's really necessary for better ideas, brainstorming, interacting, reading, hearing. And then the idea that better ideas, I know for me, come out of frustration. And the first thought we all had was alcohol, but...
I am so pleased that you raised that, because the next table I was going to call on was the table that said alcohol but feels embarrassed about it. I will come to that one more table, but let me just mention alcohol here.
And failure. Sorry. My table wants me to say failure was a big thing, too.
Failure.
Failure.
Yep, excellent. Okay. There have been funded research studies on the relationship between alcohol and creativity. Just amuses me to think about how you wrote up the proposal and probably the NSF program manager going, how am I going to get this through? But anyway, as a summary for all of you, the relationship between alcohol and creativity is curvilinear. When you get to the point that everyone is your best mate, stop writing down. It's just embarrassing. All right? This is a word of the wise for you. I'm sorry. So we have another table, I think, back there, and then we'll move on.
Well, we're pretty much the same as everyone said. It was when we're at our most relaxed, walking, either listening to classical music. That just seemed to be the theme throughout it for everyone. When they were just at their most relaxed is when they were able to think clearly enough to get down to what they needed to solve and be creative about it.
Okay.
What else did we say? The discussion with others, being able to play ideas off of each other and get more creative that way. I'm like trying to see this over my glasses. And then somebody said something rather interesting. When not using my left side of the brain mode, but using my right side of the brain mode is when I get really clear and creative.
What I would like you to do is to think about this question today and going forward, and to notice, for instance, over the next 3 days that you're together, when are the moments that you think, oh, actually, I felt really inspired. I felt my thinking was producing interesting ideas. And I just want you to pay attention to that. Now, for us, one of the most interesting things is it is extremely rare that people will say, I am at my most creative when I'm sitting in a beige cubicle at work. Who would have thought? And what I find particularly interesting about this, we do very little in the commercial sector. It's almost exclusively academic. But on the occasions when we do work with commercial organizations, they often come to us and say, we need you to make our staff more creative. And I go through this little spiel about they actually already are highly creative. But they go, yeah, okay, now make them more creative. So we do something like this, and with the senior leadership team, and say, well, tell us what works for you, what helps your creativity. And we have an interesting discussion. And then they say, right, are you going to run a training course? And we go, no. What we want you to do is to change your organization so that you do more of this and less of the things that hinder people's creativity. And they go, okay, well, thanks for coming by. We're not going to do that. Because this is harder to do than taking a training course where you can go, check mark, yeah, done that, everyone must be creative. But it is hugely important. Now, you don't have to do everything at once. There was a nice Stanford paper that came out just recently on the importance of walking and creativity. And this plays into an area which is known in the psychological literature as mind wandering, which I think is a lovely term. Basically, what it appears to be is that we need to distract ourselves just enough. And there are lots of different ways to do this. I was running a workshop recently with a lady who was knitting during the entire time. And I was talking about it, and I said, gosh, that's very interesting and clever that you can do that and pay attention. And she said, oh, yeah, I can't hear what you're saying unless I'm knitting. All I want you to do is to notice, first and foremost, what helps me to be creative, to validate that, and say, I will organize my time around this so that I'm maximizing that possibility. It's nothing very complicated, and you will find lots of ways to do it, but please do not feel that you have to compromise in the sense that if someone else says, let's run a brainstorming session and we'll all throw ideas at each other, and you go, that's my idea of hell. I want to go out on my own, think about it, and when I have my ideas, I will come back and tell you about it. Whatever works for you is what works for you. The only thing that I would add to this is we've done some research with undergrads. They're cheaper and easier than lab rats, and we've looked at the answer to the question of where do you feel most creative? And it's not unusual for them to pick a pleasant environment. Beaches, parks, things like that, which is lovely. Now that is where they think they are most creative. But if I take, I think, Fran, you mentioned about frustration. It is not unusual to find that you come up with interesting ideas when you are stuck in a metro train and you think, there's got to be a better way to do X. So I want you to pay attention to both what helps me appear to be in a creative frame of mind and where do I get my ideas from? So it may be that you need to open yourself up to some creative abrasion. You need to go somewhere to really experience the problem. So all I'm asking you to do is explore what works for you. And bear in mind that just a pleasant environment may not be your most productive environment. Now, having thought a little bit about that, so I can get my clock back, I want to talk about how we actually go about getting our ideas. And when we're thinking about that, we really need to say, well, okay, you want us to have more ideas. What sort of ideas? If we're talking about better ideas and creativity generally, you can say, are we after ideas that are unique to me, unique to the community, unique to the planet? What are we actually trying to achieve? Now, I would like to suggest to you that there is a very simple framework we can use to think about the kind of solutions that we're trying to create. And I summarize it like this. There are slightly more sophisticated versions. Sorry, let me move this just to make sure everyone can see. So, adopt, adapt, and create. There are lots of ideas out there. When Annette and I were first talking about doing a webinar about fundraising and how we could do this, one of the things I did was I just did a Google search for top fundraising ideas 2013. You get a lot back. Many of those ideas you could look at and say, I could do that. You don't have to do anything more. You just take the idea, adopt it, put it into practice. Lovely. That's a nice way to do it. Some of the ideas, you say, I could do it. Turns out it's illegal in the state I'm doing it. I would have to do it slightly differently, or we get people to squint at it. That's okay. We could do that too. So there will be a collection of ideas that you say it almost fits. We'll just have to change it a bit. And that's obviously adaptation for your ideas. And then finally, there are going to be situations where you're looking for a solution and you say, no one knows how to do this. As far as we can tell, there is no solution that works for this. And therefore, we have to go and create them. Now, I find this distinction quite helpful because we can ask ourselves the question, whenever we've got a problem, first thing we should do is say, is it possible somebody has the answer to this already? And the reason that this is so important is we've seen organizations over and over again say, oh, well, we're stuck on this. Let's have a brainstorming session. Well, you might come up with something interesting, but time is limited. Go and check whether anyone solved the problem first. And if they've got something that is good enough, can we adopt it? Can we adapt it? And if not, then we move into this creative phase. And I'd also like to suggest that just broadly, there's some sort of relationship here between where you're getting the ideas from and the type of idea and the inherent risk in them. The lovely thing about adopting somebody else's idea is that they've, in many ways, de-risked it for you. You could go and do the Bic Biro one, you could understand it, you can see the write-up, you go, yeah, that one will work. We could see what our level of success would be. Likewise, as you move to adaption, you could identify where are the unknowns. It's when we move into the creating de novo that you've got a higher and higher level of unknowns around that. Now, of course, you might find that creating entirely new ideas gives you the greatest bang for your buck. That might be the case. But really well executed ideas that other people have de-risked can also give you a fantastic result. You don't have to go and invent Twitter. Somebody did it for you. Lovely. We just have to learn from what other people are doing. I'm learning from my wife how you get 90,000 followers. Actually, I was amused while I was standing up here. My phone, which is on silent, kept going bzz, bzz, bzz. What's on there? I find a bunch of people who are tweeting about Andy Burnett just said this. Now, what I'd like to see is whether anyone tweets, Andy Burnett just said that Andy Burnett just said this, and we'll get very meta at that point. So I'd like to suggest that. Now, I, just prior to this, I think it was yesterday, I went and had a look for some examples to try and say, well, broadly, if we're talking about advocacy and engaging with people, what sort of ideas might one find and how might one go through a process of adoption and adaptation and this sort of thing. So let me just tell you about these ideas. This is, it's not a live video clip, but you can go and find it from a chap, lovely guy, who wrote a book, and I think it's called either Do Scorpions Smoke or Can Scorpions Smoke? You know, important questions for our age. And it's a book about creativity, which is why it sort of appeared on my feed reader. And it's a little video about him explaining that he wanted to do a book launch, but he didn't want to do just a normal, boring book launch, and he could play the guitar, so he went to an area in London called the South Bank, which is sort of in central London, and he just sang about his book. He did a singing book launch and gave away books for free. And the video about it made me think of the video that we saw earlier with the sandwich boards. He's not a great singer, nice chap. You don't have to be great singers too, but you could see if we wanted to talk about the deadline, you could imagine, yeah, all right, I'll go and sing about it, because you can see how it would work. So you could just adopt that idea directly. Moving on, I went and looked about conversations. I was saying, how might one engage in advocacy? And I came across this card, which amused me. Now, you can't read it, or at least I don't think you can. But it was a conversation starter card, and it had some wonderful questions on it. And some of them amused me. Let me see if I can zoom out on mine. One of them was, I seem to remember, yeah, this might be too forward, but could I encourage you to foster these disabled cats? Which just made me laugh. Now, I was thinking about that, and I thought, what are conversation starters about breast cancer deadlines and these sorts of things? Might it be possible to adapt some of these ideas as part of advocacy toolkits to allow you to engage with people in ways that are just so delightful and yet so odd that it stops people in their tracks and go, wait, what did you say to me? So it was an interesting example. And this one over here on create. Now, creating entirely new ideas, and let's just say they're new to the advocacy community rather than new to the entire history of humanity, is hard. You go through many, many ideas and the refinement process and all of this sort of thing. It's a lot of hard work. You may be lucky. You may wake up in the middle of the night and say, I know the solution. But normally, when we trace it back over time, it's a problem that you've been working on for a long period of time. And it's been incubating, and you've exposed yourself to all sorts of things. So creation is hard and it's slow. But I picked this, and this is not really a suggestion of an idea, but it was an indication of the start point of it. So I just saw this picture, and it appealed to me. My elder sister is a 2-time cancer survivor, and this is how I feel about her when I see her. And I saw this, and I thought, maybe there's the germ of an idea that might get to how people feel about their loved ones or people that they know, and perhaps there are ways that you can sort of adapt this in a very broad sense. Now, the point about all of this, I hope, is that you look at it and you go, creativity. Nah, right? It's not that difficult. Any of you could do this. You can go and look for it. You go, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we can use that idea. This is how the creative process works. You put yourself in the right frame of mind. You look for interesting stimuli with a clear understanding of this is the problem that I'm working on. Now, the point that I want to build on with this, though, is this one. The internet is your friend. Those 3 things, by the way, thanks DARPA, good job. All of those ideas just came from the internet. I just went looking for a little while, and in fact, and again, I have to thank my wife for this, 2 out of the 3 of them came from something called Pinterest, which you may have heard of. Now, Pinterest, I think, is quite amazing. It's like, as you scroll through, it's this little moving notice board of wonderfulness. And I just went through the first 2 or 3 pages and picked out things which connected with me in some way, shape, or form. And of course, the amazing thing about the internet, initially, it was about computer-to-computer communication and fault tolerance and all of that sort of thing. And now we have fantastic devices like Twitter and Pinterest, which is this sort of curated list of fascinating stuff. So if we were to take this idea of we're looking maybe to adopt and adapt more than we're necessarily looking to completely create de novo, we have these wonderful vehicles to say, I could go to Google and search for what are the best advocacy ideas in Australia. And you will get stuff back, and you will look at it, and you'll talk with your colleagues, and you go, that's interesting, we could do that. And of course, even more amazing than that, if they happen to have put a Twitter handle on it, you can reach out to them. This is the way it works now. We have these incredible networks of connected minds. We don't have to think about it on our own. That's, in my way, sort of what's so exciting. Now, I want to show you one other example on this. This might be the worst photograph ever included in a presentation, and I apologize for it. It's not so much the content of it, it's the astonishingly poor photographic skill that I demonstrated. But I took this sort of an hour or so ago because I was sitting up in one of the hotel rooms, and they were bringing tea and coffee around. And I had just got my tea bag, so that all was well with the world, and I was looking for somewhere to get rid of the tea bag. And it was interesting because the staff had taken away the rubbish bin. And so first of all, several of us made interesting attempts to guess what is the rubbish bin. I'm glad I didn't follow any of the advice because it turned out those weren't rubbish bins. But after a few minutes, one of the staff came back and he brought this and it was empty. And I thought, great, rubbish bin. But he did one other thing. He got this stirrer and he dropped it in as he walked away. And I thought, that's interesting. Why did he do that? And I looked at it and I thought, was it dirty? No. He had, in design terms, they might call it an affordance, he had given a signal that this is a rubbish bin. Because otherwise it could be a fruit bowl, it could be all sorts of things. Now, what I was curious about, and I didn't have a chance to catch him because he'd gone before I thought about it, was this something he invented? Is it Hyatt policy? I admit, I have gone around looking now. I haven't found it in the early stages. But is it high policy to do this? But it was really interesting, and it reminded me, years ago as a young student, I had dinner at one of the Cambridge colleges, and I experienced that moment of confusion. There were glasses on the table with water and lemon in them. But were they to drink, or were they finger bowls? Turns out they were for drinking, but you can imagine the sort of torment on that. So he nicely sidestepped the issue for me with one idea, which might be his and hasn't been disseminated. It might be corporate policy, I'm not sure. But the point about it is, if we put ourselves in the frame of mind which makes it easy for us to have ideas, and we pay attention to things which are anomalous or unusual, the world is giving us a continuous source of interesting stimuli. This is why I'm saying creativity, it's easy. We just have to be in the right frame of mind, pay attention, and know what problems we're working on so far. So I thought this was interesting, which is how I justify the fact that it's a rubbish photograph. So the question then is, okay, he makes it sound very easy, keeps using this meh word. Problem solved? Should we go off and do it? Maybe, because people have been coming up with new ideas since pretty much there have been people. We keep trying to stamp out unlicensed creativity, but it keeps popping up, and it's much an annoyance to consultants on creativity. But the point about it is we can also get in our own way. So I wanted to show you a few guidelines that I'm going to suggest you might like to try and see if they help you. So I'm going to start off with, I always struggle with this because there are 4 guidelines. I'm going to say each one of them is most important. Just deal with it. Delaying your judgment. This is absolutely essential. A number of years ago, I was asked by the senior management team of a health insurance company to come and help them be more creative. So we went through all the processes, and they said, great, that's really, really helpful, and we really understand the delaying your judgment part. Oh, great. And then they moved on to the next order of business in their meeting, and somebody suggested a budget change, and someone turned around and went, no, that's a crazy idea. And it's like, oh, why do I bother? Stop! We have just been talking about the fact that our judgment is a highly developed skill, for very good reason. Okay, you don't want to eat poisonous stuff, you don't want to touch high-tension electricity cables, all sorts of things where your judgment says, not a good idea. That helps us survive. However, over time, we have tended to overdevelop our judgment. So what I'm going to ask you to do, terribly simple, I want you to try delaying your judgment. Anytime you have an idea, anytime anyone else tells you about an idea, I want you to give yourself a few seconds to think, what do I like about that idea? Now, I was coaching the manager in one of the postal services who was having a very difficult time in negotiations with the unions. And we'd talked about this, and I saw him a few weeks later, and he said, I've come up with a great way of doing this, delaying my judgment. I said, fantastic, is it meditation? He said, no, I have a bottle of water. Brilliant, no idea what you're talking about. And he said, here's what I do. When I'm in a meeting and somebody says something which makes me really angry, I drink some water. Now, I like that because of the brilliance of the simplicity of it, because this is the important point. Delaying your judgment is very simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy. Now, we can all delay our judgment about, I don't know, the next Icelandic election. We can probably feel quite relaxed about it. As it moves closer to home, you will notice that you have thoughts about the election in your district or your national election, all these sorts of things. There will be thoughts which you just find difficult to deal with. And what we found is 2 things help us with this. One is to notice when other people are being judgmental. It's interesting that as you develop your sensitivity for other people's closed-mindedness or immediate reaction, it will gradually seep through to you that you go, oh, wait a minute, I've said the same thing. So it's a kind of polite way of sneaking up on yourself. And the other is just to notice and be kind to yourself. The important point about this is delaying your judgment is not the same as agreeing. This is very important. So someone can tell you an idea, you go, okay, this is what I like about it. I am not agreeing, I am exploring. Delaying your judgment is very important. Let me just give you some very simple examples of this. This is one of my colleagues, Tim Morley. Some of the time we work in an innovation lab, and the innovation lab, you can't quite see it here, had sort of sliding doors. And obviously we all have to go and get cups of tea, and we discovered it's quite hard to open the doors. So Tim actually made this, and as you can see, it's a tray with an extra arm on it so that you can open the doors. Do you like that? If that were available in crate and barrel, would you buy that? Let me move on. This is an alarm clock. It was actually originally developed by some students at MIT. It is called Clocky, and the way it works is when the alarm goes off, if you hit the snooze button, Clocky jumps off your bedside table and hides. And then 10 minutes later, the alarm will go off again, and you have to get out of bed to find it. This is a real product. You can buy that. Ask yourself, what do I like about that idea? Right? And you have to think about something. Okay, what do I like about it? I'm delaying my judgment. Let's up the ante slightly. This is an alarm clock called the Mosquito. When the alarm goes off, it takes off and flies around your head in a very annoying way. What do you like about the idea? You think about this, you go, okay, it might give me some exercises. I'm jumping around the room trying to catch the thing. I also suspect that the company's strategy is based on selling replacement flying bits that have been thrown against the wall. But we have to ask ourselves, what do we like about this? This is one of my favorites. This is a Japanese alarm clock that has an extremely loud alarm. A few minutes before it goes off, it will flash a sequence of lights. You then have to rewire the cables to match the sequence of lights, otherwise the really loud alarm goes off. What do you like about the idea? We're delaying our judgment. We're delaying our judgment. We're practicing this. Is it possible we reached somebody's level of tolerance on this? What do we like about this? It's not real. It's okay. What do we like about this idea? Right, yeah, it might build muscle strength. The child might be going up, not down. They may not be a very nice child anyway. The next time someone comes to you and says, having a deadline for breast cancer is a ridiculous idea, and I will tell you why, will you be able to delay your judgment and say, I'm curious, tell me why. I will entertain your thought because I might get new ideas. So we are practicing here with alarm clocks and photoshopped pictures, but the point is that as we edge towards more challenging ideas, it becomes harder for us to delay our judgment. I have been doing this for 30 years, teaching this, and I am making progress, but I regularly get caught out, particularly when I'm tired and by my children. And they go, can I sleep with my fire engine on my head? No, of course you can. Oh, all right, wait a minute. What am I like about the idea of sleeping with your fire engine on your head? So they give us a regular source of workouts for that. But the point is, it is extremely important that we learn to delay our judgment, because without that, new, interesting, strange ideas will tend to get filtered out, despite our best intentions to the otherwise. Problems as questions is hugely important, as I've said. There is a tendency for people often to talk about problems. We don't have enough money. That is the equivalent of ending your sentence with a period. We don't have enough money. But if you can learn to hang a question mark on the end of it, it actually invites people to start giving you ideas, and it works for you as well. In what ways might we do this for less money? How might we get additional funding? How might we do this for no money whatsoever? How might we make money from doing whatever it is we're trying to do? There is an airline in Europe called Ryanair, which has an interesting reputation, but a lot of people like it. Nobody could understand how Ryanair could sell their flights for so little money. Many of their flights are completely free. And then they discovered Ryanair had asked the question in a different way. They fly to places which are not really very well served. Actually, I ought to make this point. If you ever travel on Ryanair and you think you're going to Paris, you're actually going about 100 kilometers somewhere else. Be aware of this. But what Ryanair discovered was that out-of-the-way places would pay them to fly there. It's a clever idea. The passengers are sort of like cattle who are being shoveled somewhere they didn't really want to go, and the destination is paying for them. And you think, gosh, that is clever. Subsequently, apparently that's been banned, it's no longer allowed. But for some period of time, they were doing that by asking themselves questions in different ways and taking facts and phrasing them as questions. Hugely important. You will gradually get the hang of it. You think, what is the question, and what are the other questions I could ask about this? Don't take it as a period. Hang a question mark on the end of it. As we come up with ideas, when we've got a problem, there is a tendency for us in the desire to try and come up with really good ideas to say, what if we did this? So we diverge for a moment, we explore possibility, and then we immediately evaluate it and go, oh no, actually it won't work. It turns out it's illegal or it's broken the second law of thermodynamics. The research on creativity is actually very clear on this. If we can diverge, explore possibilities, and then converge, we do far, far better than if we try and diverge and immediately converge. So what I've put down here is a terribly simple way of thinking about it. When you are looking for ideas, whether it's searching through Pinterest or asking your colleagues, make your list first, and then pause, 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 and then make a choice. Now this goes with the idea of delaying your judgment, and I would encourage you to do this with your friends and family and anyone else that you're working with. Do not evaluate ideas while you are in the process of exploring, because what happens is you tend to follow a very conventional, sort of middle-of-the-road policy. Now, a friend of mine described this, I thought, beautifully. He said, what we're after is intermediate impossibles. And these are ideas that in and of themselves won't work, but they act as interesting stepping stones, which allow us to say, oh, okay, I can't do that, but I could do this. How very interesting. One of Elisa's slides earlier was by a guy called Chris Voigt, who was involved in some of the workshops that we ran early on in synthetic biology. And I was standing near a group of researchers who were talking about things, and somebody mused out loud. They said, what would a cell look like if it were designed by Apple rather than IBM? And he happened to be saying that within the earshot of somebody who was both a biologist and a contemporary dancer. And from that, the field of what's known as synthetic aesthetics was born, considering how beauty might inform the design and understanding of biology, which is a fascinating area. But the point about it is, we need to be able to explore possibilities without evaluating them so that we can see, do they lead to interesting places? And that applies as much as at the adaptation level as it does at creation and possibly even at adoption on that. So that's the third one that I want you to do. And then the final idea, in general, having more ideas is better than fewer ideas. Now, clearly there are limits because eventually you're saying, I'm starving, let's just make a decision and get on with it. But what we find is that when you're thinking about a problem, there is a need for people to be able to state the obvious ideas that are on the top of their mind, to sort of evacuate them, in order to make space for the strange and interesting connections that subsequently have to occur. So I encourage you not to stop with the first idea you find that you like. Explore more broadly. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. Sometimes just adding another 5 or 10 minutes to what you were planning to do allows you to explore what we sometimes call the third, which is the sort of third of ideas where we get really interesting and exciting thoughts coming out of this. So, this is what I'm encouraging you to do. And let me just stop here and say, are there any questions or clarifications that I need to deal with at this point? Any thoughts? I'm so tempted to pick on somebody and say, what do you think? But I won't, because that would not be kind. Okay, so here are our ground rules, which have worked well. There are others that can also guide you, and I should have mentioned at the start, actually, we offer a little online course on creative thinking. It just comes in little multimedia, sort of little video clips every few days. You get a 5-minute video on it. If anyone is interested in that, we would be delighted to sign you up for that. And it runs over about a month, and it takes you through the creative problem-solving process in more depth. So we will sort that out. What I would like to do now, though, is to encourage you to try applying some of this. Now, I'm not sure to what extent you have been briefed on the leaderboard. No? Okay. So, I'm going to tell you something you don't know anything about. How exciting. Outside, there is the leaderboard where there were 3 broad categories, and I want to make sure I get these right. So the green slips relate to the problem with the status quo is ... The orange slips is the people and groups I will engage with to create change are. And then my blue slips, that's just good, is when I get home, I will begin to create change by ... Now, obviously, these are thoughts that you're going to be having over the next few days. I'm actually not going to ask you to write down on the slips at the moment. What I would like you to do is to have a conversation in your table groups. You can start with the first category, whatever you want, but to actually explore, let me put these back, trying out these sorts of principles and to say, okay, we're going to delay our judgment and we're going to test that by saying, for instance, the how am I going to create change? What might be all the ways that we could create change when we get home? And to try not to judge any of them. We've already got it in the form of a question, so we don't have to worry about that. And we're going to spend, let's have a look, 10 minutes, let's say, diverging around this. So the purpose of this is really just to practice letting go of your judgment, diverging, and then we will converge just for a few minutes. What I hope you noticed, just in that 10 minutes or so, was that there may have been 1 or 2 occasions when somebody proposed something that you thought, I'm not sure about that. Because that's all we need to do to start letting go of our judgment. Notice when it's kicking in. And as you begin to notice, so you can say, that's all right, I'm not agreeing to it, I'm simply exploring it. And you'll find that the world gives you countless opportunities to notice when your judgment is kicking in. There are television stations dedicated to it. Whatever your politics is, go and watch a different one and they'll provide you with a whole series for you to practice letting go of your judgment around that. Now, I wanted to switch gears a little bit for a moment, and this relates specifically to your advocacy. There are some slides here which, because of time, I am not going to ask you to do, but I think everyone can get the slide pack, so I will encourage you to do it afterwards. What I want to cover briefly is why it's easier to sell an idea to some people than others. And there are many aspects to this, but one of the ones that we find particularly useful is to think about problem-solving style. Now, back in the early 70s, a researcher called Michael Curtin was investigating why it was that some corporate change initiatives went through very easily and others never seemed to make progress, despite the fact that they may be equally good in hindsight. And what he developed from this was an understanding that we have preferences for how we like to solve problems. Now, he named, there's a continuum, and I'll flip through to a slide in a moment. He named the two poles on the continuum adaptation and innovation, which unfortunately, because now of the popularity of innovation, I think in some ways is unhelpful. But if you were to think adapter and instigator, this might be a better way of thinking about it. The essence of what he was saying is we all exist on this continuum somewhere, and that our preferences determine how we interact with the world and particularly how we like to solve problems. And people who are at an extreme end on adaptation like to solve problems by doing things better. They like to improve existing systems. They like to find ways to achieve change without altering the structure, and they tend to work very much within the paradigm. People who are at the other extreme, who Curtin calls innovators, but I'm suggesting we might call instigators, have a desire to go outside whatever the dominant paradigm is. At extreme levels, they don't even recognize the paradigm at all. And they like to make change by doing things differently. Now, let me just flip through a couple of slides, and I'll come back to this one. This is the one that I wanted to show you. So, from having done a lot of research on that, he established that there is, as one might expect, a normal distribution of the population. Here's the really important part, though. Curtin established that if there is a difference of more than 2 standard deviations between your preference and the preference of the person that you are talking with, you will see significant communication difficulties. And it's fascinating. In our work, we get to watch this all the time. So cognitive style is real and it's important. And as you get further apart, so the difficulties become that much greater. I can pretty much guarantee you that proof through amplitude or repetition will not work. So in other words, making your argument louder or more frequently, still not going to work because we're operating in a different way. Now, I want to explore this for a moment because this is quite important. At this end of the scale, as people move towards this end in terms of their preference, and Curtin's research suggests that your preference is stable over time. So by the age of about 14 or 15, we can validly measure where your preference is, and you're pretty much stable on that. As we move towards this end, the question that people have to address is, why is it broken? We are making progress. Science has given us all sorts of things. Why is it broken? Because if it's not broken, what you are suggesting is dangerous. And I want to make very clear here, it is not a case that at this end of the extreme, people are pro-change, and at this end they are anti-change. This is not the case at all. It is how people like to go about solving problems. Now, for somebody who is seeing, you might call it conservative in the sense of we're trying to conserve the structures that have worked, seeing a change which they see as threatening to that, there is going to be a resistance to that threatening change. And it could make perfect sense. You may remember the dot-com boom and the idea that companies don't have to make profits. Apparently they do. Who knew? Right? There was a whole idea of, oh, the old economic model broken. No, not broken. Right? So there were good arguments about why conserving existing structures that are working well is a good thing to do. Up at this end, and again, talking at the extreme, if you are proposing something which is seen as too obvious too much of the status quo to any great extent, it's much harder to get people's attention. People who have a strong preference at this end, in fact, it's quite hard to get their attention at all because they're always off doing interesting things. Now, the point about this is you have no control over where someone exists on this continuum. The only thing that you can do is to think about how might I communicate my ideas in a way that is going to make it easy for people to understand the benefit of what I'm saying. As you deal with people with more of a preference towards this end, the really important question is, why is the existing model broken? Can you prove it? Do you have evidence to suggest that if we need to move to another model, we will do significantly better? You have to prove your case. And this is what Curtin found in large organizations. There is a tendency over time, as organizations become larger, they sort of drift towards this way, for the perfectly understandable reason that as organizations get bigger, they need more structure. Structure tends to attract people who are more structurally oriented. So if you want to try and change structure, you don't talk about my shiny new idea, because that's not going to work. You talk about, why is our existing structure broken? If you want to excite people who are not hugely motivated by structure, then we need to talk about what shiny and exciting ideas might we come up with. What would the world look like if we could challenge this problem, this problem, this problem? And also, up towards this end, we have a much greater interest in transdisciplinary work. It's much more exciting to work across domains than to work within. Now, I wanted to mention this briefly, and I am only touching upon these points, but it is important because we see this over and over again, that people have great ideas but struggle to sell them to other people. And one of the reasons that they struggle is because they don't necessarily understand the fact that somebody else does not view the world in terms of problem solving in the same way that they do. And that what they perceive as resistance is actually a different way of thinking about problem solving. So I just want to go back here, and then I'm going to finish. There is an instrument that you can take, the KAI instrument. Oh, the duck of doom has quacked, sorry. So it's my subtle clue. Yeah, you're out of time, Burnett. But the point is, there is an instrument, but you can actually get a reasonably good estimate of your personal score by adding up 3 subscores, and I'll just talk about them briefly. So, actually, let me go. Yeah, okay. There is a question here of you thinking about, in my most relaxed state, where might I put myself on this scale of, do I tend to come up with more unusual ideas, or do I tend to come up with more practical but fewer ideas? You don't have to do it now, I just want to walk you through this. So you find yourself, you think, okay, where would I put myself on that? And you give yourself an approximated score. You do the same when it comes to rules. Now, one of my colleagues likes to do this by giving people an insight and saying, how many miles an hour do you drive over the speed limit? Some people may say, speed limit? I didn't know there was one, but yes. And there are people who will deliberately set their cruise control to a couple of miles an hour below the speed limit because they just want to be on the safe side. So remember, how you view the world is not the same as how other people view it. But you can think about, to what extent are rules important that should be followed, or as one of my Taiwanese colleagues explained to me about traffic lights outside of Taipei, they're really just there for information. I find that quite a scary thought, I have to admit, so I'm staying away from Taiwan for the moment. And then the third area is the idea of efficiency. To what extent is it important for you to be highly organized versus less so? Again, one of my colleagues has a couple of great photographs of people's desks. They happen to be husband and wife. The level of organization is really very different. So It's, his shorthand for it is your desk a vertical filing cabinet, or has everything been tidied away? Again, at the extremes on that. So you can take that, you add up your score, and that gives you an approximate indication. The only thing that I'm asking you to do from this is to be aware that the style differences are powerful, that the way you are seeing the world could be very different from the person you're trying to influence, and that you need to think about, how might I communicate with them? Because you know about this, they don't. Therefore, you have to modify your communication. It's not easy, but as you gradually get a sense for it, you'll start to become aware of, this person appears to, for instance, come to closure more quickly than I do, is talking in more concrete terms than I am, or maybe proliferating ideas, and so you begin to get some clues around that, and you can then modify your communication appropriately. If this seems vaguely interesting, then at another time I'd be delighted to come back and talk more about it, or we could do a webinar or things like that. And with that, you've been an audience. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much. All right.